Shut up and sit down.
Hey everybody, it's the Takeover Tuesday podcast yet again. It's David Allan here, and I have a special guest today, another copywriter, Mark Pescetti, all the way from Oregon. I know it's early, Mark, and you're making a special arrangements to be on here this morning. But
hey, I haven't even had my coffee. I cannot be held accountable for the words that come out of my mouth, and I do promise you one thing: the words that do come out of my mouth will be plentiful. So be prepared to not talk that much.
Well, I know a little bit about you because I've done a little bit of research. We've talked a little bit, but maybe give people the backstory of how you got into this sort of crazy copywriting game, if you will, marketing, so forth.
Sure. Well, I'm gonna give you a Cliff Notes version. I got pulled out of the fourth grade. I had terminal brain cancer. I was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, given 3 months to live.
Wow.
And
in the fourth grade.
In the fourth grade, I was 9 years old. I got pulled out of school. I never went back to school. Cancer metastasized to the bones. It looked like I was going to die. Why I didn't die, that's a whole different story. But so I didn't go back to school, and I homeschooled, but I wasn't even properly homeschooled. I was self-schooled, so I educated myself. And when I recovered from cancer, we moved to Maui, and we were homeless for 2 years, and so that's when I discovered my entrepreneurial side.
Yeah, no doubt.
My mom.
No doubt.
Yeah, I mean, fuck. I mean, it was scary. I mean, we got to Maui from San Diego, from a nice big house in San Diego. My mom made a business investment, and it was that contract was broken the day we got there, and we lost everything. She couldn't recoup anything. So yeah, we were homeless for 2 years, and so we lived in the Iao Valley on Maui in tents. Behind the Iao Valley Lodge, and we were in a place that was, we were surrounded by exotic fruit, like star fruit, longans, lychee, mangoes, papaya, obviously, shit like that. So I decided, I'm going to go harvest this shit. First of all, eat it because I was hungry and we had no money for food. I'm going to go harvest this shit. I'm going to sell it. And I did it. I got permission from the lodge. Resist a 10-year-old kid selling fruit on the side of the road to, get money for his family. Ended up using that money. I also hooked up with Japanese tourists, busloads of them, and I would sell them on showing them the Iao Valley, the places that they would never, ever discover on their own, and I made good money doing it. And we used that money to get a house, and, so that's how I kind of graduated into being an entrepreneur. And then I strayed away from that. I went to boxing and the fighting, broke my back, broke my neck, tooth came out my nose, broke my nose 10 times, kind of got beat up. I think I had a dozen concussions. I had 55 fights, 1 pro, all undefeated. I'm actually training to get back into boxing now. But, and then fast forward, I have a 4-year-old daughter. My wife and I made a bad business decision. We're 2 weeks away from not being able to pay rent. I'm potentially going to make my family homeless and relive what my mom did to me when I was a kid. Not fucking cool. I didn't know what to do. I ended up writing an ebook in a week called Becoming the Evolution of Being, very spiritual, very niche, very woo-woo, very out there, very much how I grew up. And it was my education, self-development was my education. And I wrote articles for it. This is like circa 2005 when articles could actually get first page natural listing presence. And within a couple of weeks, I was getting sales, and all of a sudden it exploded. I made about $200,000 in a little less than $200,000 in 6 months. So it was eye-opening because what I did, I created a ghetto website. I wrote articles. I had no idea what I was doing, all natural, no paid advertising, and it saved my family. So that's how I got into this shit.
Wow, that is a great story, man. That is a tough road to hoe to get to where you are now, but it's clearly shaped everything that you do
Hey,
by having those experiences.
you know what? Life is full of defining moments. You either define the moment or the moment defines you. So you either rise to the occasion, you show up or shut up. If you're not willing to show up, then shut the fuck up. Get out of the way. Let the people who are going to show up, and create the impact that they're, in this world to create. Nobody is going to get out of your way. If you want to do something in this world, you have to create it. You have to go against the grain. Like one of the topics we talked about just a little before this call, what is a disease in copywriting? I call it a disease. A lot of copywriters are going to totally disagree with me, and I don't give a Here's why. How do you know when you like a certain food, Dave?
Because I try it, and I was like, hey, this
you try it.
amazing.
You try something new, don't you? You try something new, right?
I try something new. That's right.
Oh, my God. This is revolutionary. This is going to blow the mind of a lot of copywriters. Now, guess what? There's a lot of things working out there. There's a lot of campaigns that are fucking killing it. Now, that's one flavor, isn't it? It's one flavor. Is that the only way something can work? Or is that just what somebody discovered could work? I'm being serious. I'm not asking a rhetorical question. Is that the only thing that can work? Yes or no?
Clearly not. No.
No, it absolutely isn't. And yet, what is a disease in copywriting and direct response copywriting specifically, where you have a lot of freelancers who are coming up to the plate, who don't necessarily know a ton about business, who don't necessarily know a ton about mainstream marketing, mainstream commercials, how solutions become truly profitable. There's this, so there's this idea in direct response that you want to build on what's working. But who discovered, John Benson, for instance? A lot of people love the John Benson style. It has converted in multiple niches. So sometimes let's say you get hired for a job, and they hire you based on the merit of your work. Now I'm being a little not so metaphorical here, and they want you to write a specific style because, quote unquote, that's what works in this niche. Here's the thing: that's what worked in that niche. Now, John Benson will admit that he's tried to beat his own controls and failed with his own style. Now, how does somebody else, or let's say Chris Dodd has, Michael Fiore has tried to beat his own stuff and failed. So people who have their own style, who have established controls and niches and created fame and fortune out of it, have tried to beat their own shit with their own shit and utterly failed. Why? Because what's working is just one possibility. And what people really want, you strip away all this bullshit about what's working and swiping. Or, I think Kevin Rogers, in a post that he put up on Facebook, he was a stand-up comedian. They just call that stealing and being a hack. When you take other people's material, that's just being a hack. And I don't think that's too far away from the copywriting industry. Now, I swipe and I look at what's working. I deconstruct the shit out of what is working. I look at something, and no offense to John Benson, I look at, like Pandora style, like a seduction product, a pickup artist product, and, you see his style, fully explored in every possible way, from that John Benson pattern interrupt to trying to weave that subtle NLP, a thread throughout. But, when I look at it, when I deconstruct it, it's kind of a mess. Kind of goes all over the place. And, there's different styles, and at the end of the day, what is our job? Our job is to put a solution in front of people who need it in a way that makes them realize they want to buy it. So is there one way to do that? No. And I really, there are different, I'm going to use the word consciousness. There's a different consciousness in different companies or different solopreneurs. A lot of companies are very cautious, very, let's just take small steps. Let's look at what's working. Let's just slowly build on that. I want you to swipe it. Let's follow the format verbatim, and let's just plug in our stuff. Okay, so there's one way. Now, it's interesting because that often fails, and yet it's still very much pushed. And like I said, even the guys that write the controls on their own style and try to beat their own controls with their own style fail. Now, why should somebody who is not a master at somebody else's style try to beat them at their style when, there's infinite ways to go about it?
Yeah.
So copywriters, strip away everything that you think you fucking know, because you're wrong. We're all wrong. We don't know anything. When I write copy, I've just written 3 scripts. They're all great. They all could perform well with the right traffic. They could all be multi-million-dollar producers. I don't know, because that's why you test. And so the ego in the industry, which is massive, because as a freelance copywriter or copywriters in general, ego is kind of I've made over $100 million, $50 million of that was with one company, but the bottom line is I've made over $100 million. I could have a massive ego, but when I get hired, when I get paid from somebody's hard-earned money, and I write the copy, I will be forthright and say, I think this could massively produce tons of profitability for us, and it could fail, because I don't know, and neither do you, and neither does anybody else who looks at it and critiques it. You don't know.
You don't know. That's why testing exists.
That's why testing exists. And look at like Ty Lopez, his pre-roll on YouTube, right? That shit killed it. Got more impressions than fucking any other self-development, and quite frankly, it competes with anything else in any market. And they have made a fortune off of it. They broke a lot of rules doing that shit because it was like Ty Lopez kind of comes across like he's on the autism spectrum. Like pretty immersed in the autism spectrum. And, so that piece of advertising, with the Lambo, that thing killed it. But they broke a lot of rules. And then I was involved in getting, when they were looking for a copywriter to do their next piece, I was involved in that conversation, and I saw where they were going, which was built on what's working. And so they did the mansion thing, which did not perform nearly as good. People started getting a little irritated with Ty Lopez because they realized, wow, this fucker's just kind of, pimping out his story and chasing the money. He kind of got exposed a little bit because the copywriter didn't take what worked, which wasn't the style, but it was the rules that were broken. And there were so many more rules ready to be broken, which is what I would have done had I gotten the gig. I didn't. And they rehashed, a bunch of bullshit. And it might have performed, but it didn't. It also had a lot of backlash. And when you're building a brand like that, and you're kind of exposed for being a money chaser a little bit, which is, in my opinion, what it was, it's not good. So try something else. And again, as a freelance, a lot of freelance copywriters, they get into the freelance business, and I'll include myself in that conversation without really knowing much about business. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some big brands as well as some big direct response marketers. And so I've gotten to see a lot of data and a lot of transactions, a lot of bombs and a lot of successes. And it really is interesting what works and what doesn't work, and in what environments things succeed and fail. And I'm not just, when I say in environments, I'm talking about internal as much as the marketplace, because how creative is developed internally makes a big difference in how it performs externally. And, so if a copywriter is hired and they are stifled and said, I want you to take this control and I want you to plug my shit into it. I don't want you to be Rambo, get all, I'm going to do this my way kind of thing. But if a copywriter is really the expert, then they should be able to have the freedom to hang themselves, because that's my opinion. Now, some people will say, don't fuck around with my money. And I'm saying I'm not fucking around with your money, because if I try to pattern after what works and try to copy a style that isn't my style just because somebody else did it and it worked for them, I'm playing with your money more that way than by simply erasing everything from, what's in front of me, deleting all of this, what's working, what isn't working in front of me, and stripping it down to the basics, which is, what is your solution and how does it help the people that we want to get in front of? That's it. And let's figure it out. What's your budget? Do you want to do it just basic slides? Do you want to have production. What is it that you want to achieve? What kind of an impact do you want to create? What kind of brand do you want to create? How much money do you have to spend every month on advertising? Because if you don't have a big advertising budget, none of this shit really matters. And I don't know, it doesn't have to be a huge advertising budget, but yeah, you need a couple grand to test. You need to get a slice of what's going on out there. And it takes investing in traffic and building media to figure out what does and doesn't work for you.
No, I think that's a good point. It's very good points they're making here because, when you are a freelancer and you do work with different clients, you see the gamut run of all their different approaches, sort of like, and a lot of them do fall under that approach you're talking about, which is the play it safe, go with what's working. We don't want to deviate too much because, everyone else is kind of, but that's how you sort of stay in that same space. You don't hit it out of the park if you stay in that same grouping. It's very much like copywriting itself as a profession. If you continue to, slum it, if you will, for lack of a better term, you can't command those high fees because you're fighting for the scraps at the bottom of the, ladder, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I look at like Allan. He is business in Singapore, Success Vantage. He's a cool guy. He gives copywriters rope to hang themselves, which is a good thing because if a copywriter isn't taking chances, in my opinion, they're not showing up. That doesn't mean that they need to do something radical. I mean, you could if 10 copywriters are pitted against each other to develop the control for the same company and the same solution, and they're all limited to just slides, to just copy and slides, just black text, white slides. There's a lot of quote-unquote radical things copywriters could do to create that pattern interrupt, to create that memorability factor in the lead that makes people just drool and salivate for the next line. We have this palette, this spectrum of emotion that we all get to draw from and create these beautiful tapestries and patterns and colors and energies and essences. And that's what we get to do with copy. And it's unlimited, just like music, it's unlimited in the kind of hooks that a song can employ to pull you into it and make you feel something, trigger that mirror neuron effect. I mean, we are all always desperate for that empathetic feeling of being connected to somebody else, where our lives and our stories are mirrored in somebody else's, and we feel like, wow, I'm not alone. If we can achieve that in copy, if we can create that mirror neuron effect and be vulnerable and open up, this is one of the things that a lot of copywriters don't understand, is that storytelling is one of the path of least resistance to selling anything. Because when you share and you trigger the mirror neurons and you help the prospects see themselves and what it is you're talking about, it's so much easier to take them on a journey to that buy button authentically. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So
when you're sitting down to...
That's my feel, brother.
No, I feel you, brother. Now, when you're sitting down, let's say you're going to work with a new client, and let's say they give you some rope with which to hang yourself. What is your process? We've talked to a lot of copywriters on this show, and everyone's got their different sort of way they go about things. Of course, there's a lot of similarities in regards to the research and stuff, perhaps, or the ways they go about it. But sort of, what's your process? How do you go about this whole thing?
I'm very collaborative. Extremely collaborative. I like to work with people that have the best solution in that niche.
That's a good start.
Of course, every copywriter wants that.
Right.
But I've also converted massively for, just okay products. So the product doesn't determine the success of the campaign. That's reality. You always want an amazing solution, but having an amazing solution, and this is horrible to say, does not determine the conversions at all, ever. It doesn't. You are never limited by just the solution. Now, that's not saying go pimp out crap, because there's too much of that already going on. But when I start with a project, I've already vetted it, I'm already involved, the vetting process is a huge part of it, because a lot of copywriters are, I'm sure, aware that when you start something, you're oftentimes in that honeymoon phase. You just sold yourself, everybody's excited, and then you get into the work, and then there's a lot of criticisms and, well, I don't know if that's going to work. Do you think that's going to work? Well, that's why we're going to test it. So you show up and collaborate. So when I show up, I collaborate, I interview, I ask a lot of questions, very story oriented. If there's a great story there, I'm going to focus on that first and foremost, because sales, in order for sales to work in any way, shape, or form, whether it's brand advertising, whether it's direct response, doesn't matter. For a sale to occur, you have to connect with somebody first. You have to connect with them as an emotional being. Like a John Benson style pattern interrupt. Those can achieve that. Yeah, absolutely. That's one possibility. So, and they're used a lot. You're like, take a look at this, blah, blah, blah. So they, the subtle things like that definitely can work, and there's brilliance to them, and there's lots of different ways to go about it. But you also have to get a tone. Excuse me. You have to get a feeling for the tone that they want, that they're comfortable with, because everybody's comfortable with only so much. So you got to see where they see the company going, and either agree or challenge. So it's okay if we go in that direction. Here are the possibilities. Here's what's likely to unfold. If we go in this direction, here's what's likely to unfold. So tone, positioning, how you enter the marketplace. That's first and foremost where I always begin, because as copywriters, we oftentimes forget we can enter a conversation at any point in that conversation. So we're unlimited in terms of what we can say and how we can say it. And that's both amazing and inspiring and intimidating and overwhelming. So how do we start out with infinite possibilities and distill it down? Well, for me personally, my best ideas, and this is going to sound woo-woo, but my best ideas come after immersing myself in collaborating with my client, asking the right questions, listening to that interview. Always record it, listen to that interview. Get especially if you're working with people who are the expert in their field, in their industry, in their niche. If you're working with somebody who's just starting themselves, this is their first product, good luck, because you're gonna have to create the tone. You're gonna have to project manage that shit, to the nth degree. I mean, it's just gonna be all you. It's gonna be all on you. So I personally don't necessarily like doing that unless it's somebody I really connect with, and I can't just imagine not being the one to front their solution, their product or service, and get it out there. I want to be that. I want to, just from an ego perspective, I want to be the one to introduce it into the marketplace. But otherwise, I want to work with people who are already successful and have at least $1 million a month for advertising. Because if they don't have that big of a budget, I'm not going to make very much money. And I'm a back-end person. I won't necessarily take less up front, but I'm going to stay on that project until it converts if I have a substantial enough back end to make it worth my time, and they're willing to keep testing until we find that control. So when I enter into a project, first of all, and this is really important, build your fucking relationship. Start there first and foremost, and always. Build your relationship, build a rapport, because you're going to need to fall back on that rapport when things start get challenging, and they will. Because when things start getting challenging and start getting toxic, that's when a lot of projects fall apart. So that's when I say the internal environment affects the external result, what's put out into the marketplace. So, the internal rapport and internal dynamics, the internal relationships that you create within a company or the person who's hiring you, that is extremely important, and that needs to be nurtured first and foremost and throughout the entire process. Because you could be right or wrong, and it doesn't matter. That's the problem. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. You have to know when to make a stand and when to shut up. And so, in But in terms of like developing creative, it's I immerse myself in the collaboration and the research, and then I completely unplug from it and allow my brain the back process. And I will get ideas out of nowhere. I've gotten my first $1 million idea was in the middle of a lake. So when shit just comes to you, you ever seen Ancient Aliens? They call that the Akashic records, that everything that ever was and ever will be already exists. You're just tapping into those records. Some people call it the collective consciousness. Some people just call it being empathetic. Some people just call it being a genius. Oh my God, out of nowhere, I got this $1 million idea, but it's not really out of nowhere. We're working constantly. Once we immerse ourselves in information, we're working constantly. And this is something that a lot of copywriters, I think, should be aware of and embrace more, because a lot of them, they like try to push the creative, push it out. And when you understand how the brain works and how we learn, you have to unplug. You have to allow for relaxation to occur in your body to fully absorb what it is that you've discovered. And from that, you will get ideas. If you really tap into relaxation, you will get $1 million ideas much faster and much clearer than if you just try to push into a script or push into a letter or into a funnel. So it really is important to get that idea and to get that inspiration, because that inspiration for an idea that you get and you believe in is going to be that fuel to push you through a script and push you through any of the challenging moments between you and your clients, where you have to fight for your creative, where you have to sell your creative. You have to deconstruct it and explain why it can work. And and there's no right or wrong way to get there. And and also, again, figure out what they're willing to do. Figure out how they're willing to test. I always like to test simple versus beautiful. If I have the budget, I would love to test a simple slide message versus something that is, has a totally different flavor, maybe Hollywood style trailer, just something to really grab people, create that shock and awe, or, something, a controversial statement. One of the leads I'm doing right now is just going straight into a controversial story that happened in my client's life, just straight into it, no prefacing at all. And that's a pattern interrupt, but it's very different than what everybody else is doing in the space. I had a whole bunch of different leads, or different trailers, different entrance points into the conversation, and I'm always trying to see, not just what sticks in terms of good ideas, but just what sticks in terms of what resonates. And not to, and for copywriters as well, this is really important. Never get attached to your own bullshit. There's infinite possibilities for how to go about something. So if your client is, astute, if they have experience in the industry, and you do too, always know when to shut the fuck up. Always know when to listen more than talk. You can probably tell I have that problem. But always know when to listen more than to talk. Because if you say something, if you propose creative and that creative is challenged, there is gold oftentimes. And I also encourage a lot of copywriters to, if they're not immersed in content and writing native landers and all that, blogs and video content, free content. Free content's a great way to get validation about hooks and then positioning in the marketplace, so that you can kind of just use data, use content, use what people are responding to. Engagement. Engagement is a huge part of converting. So if you can prove massive engagement for a certain kind of message and content, then you can take that messaging, that validation, and weave it into a hook and into a direct response campaign.
Excellent, man.
That's not done enough, and it's very cheap. $20 can get you a ton of information in virtually any market.
No, I think that's you dropped a lot of value there, man. Because now, do you find yourself when you are you do the research and then you push away from the table, so to speak? Do you have a certain place you go to think, or you're just walking around? Like you said, you're out in the middle of a lake. I read, like, what's the book by Nassim Taleb? I think it's called Anti-Fragile. And he talks in there about, he never gets writer's block because he figured out, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, of course, he figured out that he would just go for a walk, and by the time he came back, he knew exactly what he needed to do.
Yeah, well, you have to attune your mind. I love John Carlton's quote on, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, writer's block is thinking about something else. Truer words haven't spoken.
Right. That's great.
So props to John Carlton for that, because if you're having a writer's block is essentially resistance, and it's usually pressure we put on ourselves to perform, and you need to just get out of, you're not validating your existence, you're not proving your worth, you're trying to resonate a product with the audience and prove to them, demonstrate to them the importance of that solution in their lives. That's your job. So you have to kind of check the ego at the door and let your desire to create the control and beat everything in the marketplace. Just make that agreement with yourself that that's what you're doing. But back the fuck off from it. Because if you keep reminding yourself of that, all you're doing is distracting yourself and creating writer's block by producing resistance to actually sit down and do it. Because you're always if you're thinking about all the impact that you want to create and being excited about that impact, but also being worried about not reaching that impact, then that is writer's block. And a lot of copywriters are horribly guilty, or wanting to impress the shit out of their client. That could be writer's block. The wife saying, I need you to be done at 5 o'clock. You are working too much. Thinking about that, that's writer's block. The writer's block comes in many different forms, and one of the things that I like to do is I focus on myself. I'll do yoga. I'll smoke a joint. I'll whatever I need to do to get out of my head and get out of my way, feel good. That's what I do. I focus on feeling good, on nurturing myself, on getting into a fucking blissful state of mind. That is when I sit down and write winning copy.
No, I think that's very good advice. Now, are you you push away from the table when you do write? Do you have some sort of, like, there's a very famous sort of the way Eugene Schwartz would set his egg timer and sit down at his desk for 33 minutes and 33 seconds, and then just sort of be like, well, let's take a look at, he sort of gradually, almost like osmosed into the project, even when he was, maybe not feeling it or blocked, perhaps. He would just sort of relax, like you're saying, relax. He would still sit at the desk, though, and then he would sort of gradually, pour over what he was supposed to be working on, and then he would get started. He sort of had this process of just firmly planting himself. Now, you seem to be one of the people who likes to get away from it, physically as well as.
Well, no. When I sit down, so we're always dealing with the resistance. There's two forms of thinking. There's resistance and allowing. So like, you ever heard the term "the brain doesn't hear a negative"?
Don't think of a pink elephant.
Exactly. So when you're thinking about being blocked, you're just going to create more block. That's just the way the brain works. So if you're sitting down and you're not really into it, I mean, who knows what's going? Everybody's got shit going on in their lives. So it's just like an athlete. An athlete has to get into the zone, and there's no right or wrong way to get into the zone. There's people have their own methodology for getting into the zone, but you have to get into a state of allowing. So how do you get into a state of allowing? Well, I get into a state of allowing by distracting myself. I'll have conversations. I go to coffee shops and work. I need chaos to perform well. I tune it out. It becomes white noise. And I can write. I've written an entire winning script in less than a couple of hours. My shortest time is 32 minutes to write a script that has produced over $1 million. But most of the time it takes me a week or two. And I allow myself, one I don't remember who it was, but one of the best pieces of advice that I read or got was stop while you still got something to give. So when I'm, feeling like I'm peaking, I'll stop and I'll save that because it's like if you deplete yourself constantly, then you're always catching up. So you don't want to feel depleted, and also realize, this is one of the we all going back to that Akashic Records kind of thing. We all have access to the same information, and it's just a matter of getting out of the way. I also don't put too much stock, and this is you can take it or leave it. A lot of people don't agree with me. I have read very few copywriting books. The majority of my copy expertise comes from observation, just observing in my own life. That was, again, my education. It was focusing on my own self-development that allowed me to have such a bird's eye view of emotion. And humanity is built on emotion, and sales is all about emotion. Copywriting is the language of emotion. So in any way that you can, get clear on emotion, because the more you are clear on what you observe and what you feel, that's becoming an expert on emotion, and that's what copywriters are, experts of emotion. So in any way that you can, always observe emotion. If you get into a fight with your spouse, observe what you're feeling. If you're sick, observe what you're feeling. If you're seeing somebody who's sick, observe what they're feeling. Observe all the time, because that is your expertise. If you don't know how to see an immediate inroad to how to connect with somebody on an emotional level based on the circumstances that they're going through, then you're not a very good copywriter. So you need to be able to do that, and you need to be able to do it like second nature. And a lot of copywriters do struggle with that. So focus on that. Live your life through the lens of a copywriter, through the lens of somebody who is constantly researching emotion.
Right.
And that's what we're doing. We're always researching emotion. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So we're always typing ourselves the right copy in our lives, and as long as we live that way. And by doing that, you're always in the mindset of being that copywriter, of being that expert, of being that person who can show up, sit down, and just whip out some amazing copy. But always, it's like get in touch, get connected. It's like when you develop a hook, get connected to the voice, get connected to the tone, get connected with, it's like I'll map out my copy. I'll map out the elements that I want to cover and how I want to link those elements together. So, and it doesn't necessarily always work out that way, but it gives me a template to kind of, play off of. And so instead of swiping what's working or what's winning, I've deconstructed the emotional elements from what's working, and I'm trying to figure out different vantage points in which to connect with those circumstances and emotion. And that's my personal formula: circumstance, emotion. What circumstances is a person going through, and what emotions are correlated with that? Or I can go about it in a different way. What emotions is a person experiencing, and how is that manifesting their circumstances? So this creates, so I will just sit down and I'll just start writing down all the different emotions, and from a more empathetic standpoint, as if I'm feeling them. How am I processing that? And I'll just write that down, or I'll do a audio stream of consciousness, and that's also something that I do is I'll record something, get it transcribed, and play around with it. Because the way that we talk is going to be different than the way we write, and the way we write needs to sound like the way we talk. So, it just depends on how connected you are, or how clear you are on your voice, your direction, your tone, your hook, your positioning, getting to the offer, how you're going to portray the offer, how you're going to position the offer, how you're going to transition from a story to an offer. There's like all these different elements and segments, and you have to figure out how to make it all flow, how to give it an essence and keep it simple. And that's something I personally struggle with, is the keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple, yeah.
Yeah, because it's one thing, right? One message, one action. And it's when you have all when a product can mean a lot of different things, or can do a lot of different things, or there's a lot of different messages, it really is important to get down to one thing, that, a mechanism that kind of sorts it all out. Because if you don't have that simplicity, you're going to confuse the fuck out of yourself, and you're definitely going to confuse the fuck out of your audience, and that doesn't convert.
Yep. Good tip. Very good
tip. So that's always for copywriters, always the solution down to one thing, one mechanism. Like in the relationship market, in the pickup artist market, stuff like that. I focus a lot on brain chemicals, because it's an easy mechanism that can distill information down, to one thing, and it makes it so that there's a reason why it's easily duplicated. If that duplication factor isn't there, if somebody has achieved something amazing and you need to show how anybody can do it, then that duplication factor needs to be built into the mechanism, so that you can distill it down to one thing, and you can write extremely simple copy that's one message to one solution.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's really important.
It takes it out of the hands of, like, you're going to have to do massively hard work to get the same, you know what I mean? Also takes it out of that realm, which is the mechanism that provides that duplicity is like, these, like you said, in a dating scenario, brain chemicals, these same brain chemicals exist in your brain that will help you with these factors, because that's one of the things they sort of talk about in copywriting circles is the, removing sort of the idea that this is going to be a lot of work, that this is a very simple, easy sort of a solution,
I went to not this year, but last year I went to the Traffic and Conversion Summit, and the most impactful part of the summit for me, aside from, there's some great information, but and people really do, copywriters need to understand compliance with Facebook, with Google, what you can and can't say. So unless you're cloaking traffic, you need to know how to write compliant front ends so that you can get into the conversation that's going to convert, and that's a whole other conversation. But most people don't know about Facebook compliance. Most copywriters don't understand Facebook compliance very deep at all. And I would suggest, if a copywriter has that opportunity, to work with a sales rep at Facebook and pick their brain on how they look at the subject matter that you're working with, because it gives you amazing insights about how to approach that copy, how to approach it in a way that's going to be effective, and how to approach it in a way that's going to be compliant with the traffic platforms, so that you are anyway. So at the Traffic Conversion Summit, Perry Belcher talked about brain chemicals, and it was diving into brain chemicals, the brain chemical science that changed their entire business model, a digital marketer, and how they approach writing copy. And he talked about the books, The Political Brain and Meet Your Happy Chemicals. And I read both, and they're brilliant. And we are a dopamine-driven people, humanity. Anything that can be said that triggers if you know how to use your body and use your mouth and use your words to trigger dopamine, you're going to be extremely successful in this life. And that's what politicians do. That's what food companies do. That's what large corporations do. That's what Facebook does. Facebook is totally based. Mark Zuckerberg created a dopamine producing or dopamine receptor lighting up machine, because every like we get triggers dopamine. Every time somebody comments, triggers dopamine. It's just amazing what dopamine does and how it affects us, how it influences us to do things that we would not normally otherwise do. And copywriters need to understand that, because if you understand the physiology behind emotion and how you can trigger that physiology with words, you are gold.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Mark Pescetti. We'd like to thank Ben Sound at bensound.com for the intro and outro music, and we'll return next week with part 2 of our interview with copywriter Mark Pescetti.